Really appreciate you both for like taking time out during your lunch to come and talk with folks, to bring them up to speed about what's going on in Oakland and around the school board and the contract fight. So Hilaria was telling us about these different committees that, like, you have a bargaining team, about 50. These are all teachers and educators in Oakland, right? And so,
yes.
Which committees are both of you on?
I'm on the Bilingual Education Committee, and I'm also on Common Good.
And I'm also on Common Good. Common Good. Hilaria, did you explain what Common Good was earlier?
No, go for it.
Common Good is something that kind of came out of Chicago Teachers Union, and it's about a decade ago. It's when we're trying to bargain for things that especially impact our students with a social justice and equity lens, and our families. They also can impact us as well, but they're really something for the greater community, and they're outside the traditional, oftentimes outside the traditional purview of bargaining a lot of the time. And so it's a little bit harder, but they're still very worthy things to be bargaining for. And then I'm also on the newcomer committee. I teach newcomer students at Skyline about half of the day.
Like, so, you know, I think that's one of the arguments that a lot of people who oftentimes argue against when teachers go out on strike or when they're fighting for their contracts. This is often used not just for teachers, but like across anything in terms of labor, right? When there's a labor contract fight that's happening and it's very public, oftentimes they'll just go, oh, that worker or that teacher is just being greedy. They just are looking out for themselves. And so I think it's really great to hear that, you know, OEA is prioritizing that. It's not just that the teachers are not just talking about, like, you know, benefiting for themselves, but what does that look like for the greater community?
Yeah. And what one could even argue, like, our struggle for a living wage and living work conditions or humane working conditions does also impact students and families, because one of the things we're hearing from parents and families and students so much is they want teachers in their classrooms. They don't want long-term subs. They want to stop the teacher turnover to other districts like Hayward and San Leandro, where so many of our great veteran teachers leave for. And so it is, I think both things are actually, I think at least in Oakland, most people understand that there's a connection between our pay and the quality of education, the learning conditions kids get. So it's a mixture of both what we're fighting for.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that framing, and that like means so much to, I think folks when a lot of us, when we went out on the picket lines to support the teachers in their strike a few years back, right? That a lot of people really did understand that, and the massive support for the teachers that did go out on strike. And, you know, oftentimes that's the framing that's used, that like folks are just greedy and they're just looking out for themselves. But my understanding that OUSD, like you're saying, one of the reasons why we don't have retention is like people are getting paid and willing to go to other school districts. And Oakland is like the lowest paying in Alameda County.
Yeah. And so because we're the lowest paid in Alameda County, one thing, because I teach at a site with over 100 members, and I, as a union rep, have talked to every single teacher here, I've learned that some teachers are attracted to come here just to get their credential with the intention to leave, because the district's paying for people to get their credentials. And so we're bringing in people here that aren't planning on staying, and just to kind of you can get hired here and get the experience you need and then leave. And that's not really meeting the needs of our families. If they offered a living wage, I think people would be much more likely to stay and live here, because there's many great things about living in Oakland, in the Bay Area. But if the incentive is to leave, whether it's in the middle of your career or the beginning of your career, that pay issue is really creating a cycle of turnover that is harming our students, because we lose that once someone develops the expertise of being able to teach in Oakland, they go off and bring that expertise to another community in California or somewhere else. So I'll check.
It's also difficult to afford to live in Oakland, and especially with rent increases and inflation. A lot of people, what I'm noticing, are having to move out of Oakland or out of the Bay Area because they can't afford to live here.
Yeah, and that's a major issue, not just for teachers, but for many, many longtime Oaklanders, right? Is the displacement of our folks. And I think that, you know, some of that is about the district itself, and some of it is really these larger forces like corporations and privatization that really wants to come into Oakland and like push out our people on all kinds of levels, right? It helps to destabilize, you know, working class lives and poor people's lives, and so that's major. So what are some of the things that you all are fighting for in terms of this contract? I hear about the common good, so it sounds like there's something about, you know, possibly about housing in there. Like, what are some other things that are really important to the bargaining team and to the teachers in Oakland?
Yeah, in terms of common good, our common good proposal is really huge right now because we're trying to cover a lot, and it's because a lot is needed and a lot has been needed. A big thing that I can talk to is safety. It's pretty much basics. So making sure we have emergency plans at every site, making sure we have teams at every site that can support in case of emergencies, making sure that we have safe traffic around campuses, and I feel like I'm definitely missing a lot, but there's a lot around disaster preparedness. And Jimmy, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
So a few of the other things we could highlight is for reparations for Black students. We know our district passed a board policy, the George Floyd resolution, and a reparations policy as well in 2020. However, it's not really, most people would agree, been implementing it with fidelity. And so we're wanting the district to really focus on funding it and implementing it. And then another thing I'll add is there's an environmental justice aspect. For that, not only are we looking for more shade structures at some of our elementary schools for when kids are going outside in the heat, we also have, like my classroom, I want to say like over 12 days during those heat waves was over 100 degrees, although my thermostat only goes to 9. We're wanting the district to work on really setting some goals and finding the funding by whatever means necessary to make these classrooms livable during heat waves so students' learning isn't interrupted. And so we want them to weatherize our classrooms so students can learn in these heat waves, because that's a huge equity thing. If suburban districts have access to climate control during those heat waves, those kids are still able to learn. But there's no way you can learn when it's 100 degrees in a classroom. And then also we're looking at equity for transportation. We know San Leandro, for example, which we lose a lot of kids to, they're offering free bus passes for low-income students. Our district does not do that in an equitable way, and we want our district to move towards that.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add that I felt was really important was in our proposal, we have written down inclusive and shared leadership, which is part of the community schools movement, a movement to make all, or to create criteria for community schools that support students like in a whole child perspective. And I think that inclusive shared leadership is really important because, I mean, for lots of different reasons.
What does that look like? What does, you know, shared leadership look like?
Well, I believe it results in the formation of steering committees at each site. And I believe a district-wide steering committee. And what we're envisioning is that would be a place where students, parents, community members, and educators could participate with the district in making important decisions, and especially around the implementation of the community school model and using of that funding. And that is something I'll highlight that Richmond just won, United Teachers of Richmond, in their contract up in West Contra Costa County. And so it's hopefully something we can move towards here as well. One of the community traumas we've seen around the school closure fight, better the lack of the district paying attention to family and
Got
community
it.
voice.
Appreciate that. Like, I think this is a lot of context that a lot of folks don't get to hear about, right? It's very something that feels like out of sight, out of mind for a lot of folks. And so like being able to, for you all to share that with us is really, I really appreciate it. I'm wondering too, there's, and I just want to give big shout out to Black Organizing Project for their decade-long work on really being able to get reparations for Black students, getting that George Floyd resolution passed, and really mobilizing all of Oakland to come out and really fight for that. So I think, you know, there were no illusions about the work that it would require, but like a thoughtfulness around the actual implementation of this is really important, and that like a complete, like you said, Jimmy, fidelity to the resolution itself, and like the completion of that, and get it moving, to get it going. Because I think oftentimes we're always waiting. We're like, when is this going to actually happen? When is this going to actually happen? And oftentimes, like when talking about systematic oppression, that's where we're like faced with the actual work, right? It's like the bureaucracy of trying to make it happen. And that's why we're always stalled in these moments, because unraveling the systems that we have in order to replace it with new systems, there's like resistance from that old system, from the status quo. There's like, you know, decolonizing our minds around it, right? Like being able to give up old ways of thinking is really difficult for folks. I'm wondering, one of the things that a lot of folks have been following for a while now is the school closures, and I know that that is one of the common good kind of one of the big points around OEA's platform. And I know that the school board recently rescinded some of the last closures that were slated for this year, for 2023. So I'm wondering, could you like talk a little bit about what that means and what that impact would mean for Oakland? And because I feel like laying on this is still like the underlying question is not just about the school closures and the impacts, because that's major and that's real. But then the underlying question often is, what about the balanced budget, and what does that mean?
Well, one thing I'll say about that is that in our proposal for common good, we're looking to see all the other places, and specifically cutting from central office, all the other places that we can cut from before closing schools. And so making sure that we're looking to see what funds we could use, what perhaps central office positions are not necessary that we can cut, that can be all done before even considering closing schools, because we know of the really intense negative effects that closing a school has on communities for
and
generations.
That's like such a big thing, right? Because it's like it feels like what the administration tends to do, and the previous boards tended to do, was like, well, we've got to balance this budget, and the way to do that is cut from the school sites, as opposed to like talking about the administration, because it feels so top heavy, right?
One thing we're pushing for in this contract fight is an equity impact analysis, which is actually state law. I forget the AB, but there's an AB that requires an equity impact analysis. We're actually asking for a 2-year equity impact analysis before closures and mergers. One thing that equity impact analysis does is mean that we can't make these sudden decisions. They have a huge impact on traffic patterns, on neighborhoods. When a school is closed, it can contribute towards blight in a neighborhood. When we need to make sure we're not doing it only in in schools that are especially educating, especially Black and Latinx students, because of the obvious histories around that. And then if it's done in neighborhoods where those communities live, it's harming the property values. Like the ripple effects from these decisions are major. So we shouldn't just be able to force these decisions down in a last minute. We need to really be careful and deliberate. And also, you know, recently I heard that 1 out of 2 children in Oakland do not go to an OUSD school. And so there's a huge potential to bring some of those students back. And instead of thinking like short term, we have to close the school today, what if we thought in the medium term about how do we bring these families back? And maybe this is an opportunity to lower class size, and through the community schools model, bring in more programs in the community for those spaces, right? There's a huge community need. Maybe, you know, there's organizations we can partner with to use that space, especially in underserved neighborhoods that lack a lot of resources. Why are we not thinking more creatively about how to use that space rather than just to close the school and add to blight in neighborhoods, right?
Appreciate that. No, I appreciate that, because I think, you know, one of our analysis at Oakland Rising is that, you know, that is contributing to the potential for corporations and outside forces to come into Oakland and take over the land and turn that land into development projects that will also just continue to impact displacement of, you know, working class communities of color. And the other, and I want to just also give a shout out to the parents who took Parker Elementary School as a model to what it could potentially look like when you turn over these spaces that you do end up closing. Like, what could it eventually look like actually for the community instead? Like, what could be in place instead of just, because I think that was one of the biggest critiques is like, you're going to close these schools, but you don't even have a plan for what's going to happen with that land. And we know that immediately after some of that closures, like in D4, Gary Yee, who was the previous school board director, right, brought a developer onto one of the community day schools land to like walk the land and see what kind of development project could happen there. And that to me was a clear like show of like how the city and mayor, even at the time, Libby Schaff, goodbye, thank God, but like that her influence and that the level of influence that developers have in our town to move those kinds of things.
Yeah, I also for community day school, it's also like we're bringing, and even to an extent, I think what's going on with Holy Names is possibly related, where we have this really expensive real estate that a lot of young people of color were getting access to, right? And at Holy Names University and a community day school, and up here at Skyline as well. And these were not places originally designed for that, right? And what happens with that land? Who's going to have access to it after that change? I think the equity impact analysis could slow things down a little bit. It also could, so we can think more deliberately about that and be a little check on that land use, and also thinking about like, hey, if you're going to use Parker for like night school or adult education, what's the parking situation going to be there and security at night, right? Have the neighbors been consulted with? We shouldn't be jamming these decisions down without talking to the neighbors and making sure like the people that live there when they come home from work at night are going to be able to park if they park on the street, right? So we really need to think about a relationship with the community as a district, because again, 1 out of 2 people in this city or kids don't go to OUSD schools, right?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, because it's like when we're talking about like, I think oftentimes people think that OUSD is really siloed from the rest of the city, but it's actually embedded. Like all of our schools, all of the property are embedded in neighborhoods. And speaking to that, I think in relationship to the reparations for Black students, also, I think a part of the George Floyd if I'm correct. Please, if I'm incorrect, please correct me. But I think there's a part of the Reparation for Black Students resolution that was about restorative justice. And so I know that one of the demands too is about restorative school culture. And so I know that I know personally a lot of restorative justice educators and folks who have been doing work on campuses around that. But I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about what OEA is really, what you all mean about restorative school culture? What is that? And like what in the demands are there that need to be incorporated into that?
Yeah, I can speak to something that we put in our proposal. We wanted to have 6 restorative days within our academic calendar, so that we could, in teachers and educators in the classrooms or at their sites, or rooms, or if they're specialists, wherever they end up having to work, because I know they don't always get a classroom to work in, but that we could have some restorative days to start setting up school culture and socio-emotional development in those days, and having those as protected time, to not have the expectation to suddenly get into like the curriculum, but taking time to develop relationships with students, and maybe reset also once we're in like the middle of the year or towards the end of the year. And that's something that we have in our proposal under high quality equitable
like,
teaching.
Because you all are like at the forefront of when things aren't going right at home, when things aren't going right just in society, when we're all like completely stressed out. I remember my kids, when they went back, I have 2 kids, like they're both in middle school, 6th and 8th grade right now. And when we went back from the pandemic, like how stressful it actually was, because they were so excited to like go back and be in person with their friends. But then there was an added stress to that, right? It was like, I think, we're not talking about like the economic impacts that it has had on our families. And they're all coming to school with those issues. And you all are really at the forefront of like bearing the brunt of the impacts of that, right? Because oftentimes for kids, when shit hits the fan, they're going to act out, right? And so I feel like that's at the front of that. And so there's a little bit about the physical safety of stuff, and then there's also public health issues that are there, because I remember during the strikes, they talked about one of the big demands then was about nursing staffing, right? There wasn't enough nursing staffing. So could you talk a little bit about like either one of those, like the safety issues and around the public health issues? Because these all feel like intertwined, they're intersectional, right?
Yeah, I happen to be at a school site where we have a full-time nurse here, although she does have to sometimes leave to help out at other school sites with kids with high needs, health needs. And that's one of the things we're really pushing for is increasing our nursing staffing, because many of our students are not having access to regular health care. I can't tell you how many times since coming back, like a student has come to me about a health need, and I've said, do you have like a primary care physician you see every year for a physical that you could call right now about this? And they're like, because that's what I think. I'm not a doctor, I can't tell you what to do. And they're like, no, I don't have someone I regularly see. So having a nurse at school at least is like having one professional there that the kids can consistently see for those 4 years, who can, help with referrals, help with, any emergency. Literally our nurses in OUSD, it's well known, have responded to emergencies and saved lives. So whether it's someone going into like diabetic shock or a serious accident, that happens, not just for students, but also they could be a first responder for a staff member before an emergency responder is able to get to a campus. So it's literally a potential life or death situation, right? When we have that, and it's a major health equity piece, right? Just like with, restoring the funding for restorative justice, we used to have, a program that rivaled the country, any other program in the country, I would say. And then that's just been cut and gutted since 2019. We need to really expand access to healthcare on our campuses.
Sorry, I was just thinking about this. My kids used to just be like, oh, if you wanted an ice pack, just like go to the nurse. That's all that you got when you went to the nurse's office, because the nurse oftentimes wasn't there at the school because they came maybe once a week for just a couple hours. And I was like, so all those other times, don't ever get hurt, don't get sick, like don't do any of those things, because they'll just give you ice pack and send you back to class. Hilaria, we were going to say something. I apologize for cutting you off.
No worries. Yeah, just going off of that, I think that nurses obviously know and see a wide range of issues, and I think that that's going back to like our big bargaining team. I think that's a strength of our team, is that school nurses worked on the proposal for negotiation, so they know what they need, and they one ask that I remember is that, like Jimmy said, is that they need more nurses because there's just not enough. And so we need to hire and retain nurses. And so they know what they need best. And that's why they're on our big team and proposing that. And something else, just to add about socio-emotional, is that right now at my campus, we're definitely feeling the effects of, I'm not sure if it's PBIS or what was the other name, Jimmy? Like changed names recently, right?
For health services, or we have restorative justice, PBIS, and there was another program, I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, I think it was formerly PBIS, but anyways, the support that we got from those folks was cut. And so right now, a lot of the restorative circles and a lot of the issues are falling on our social worker, and she's only one person. And so at our school, we're really feeling the effects that's being cut at the district.
PBIS is positive behavioral intervention support.
Appreciate that. I appreciate for breaking down the acronym, because I was about to ask what that was. There's so many acronyms out there, right?
Thank you, Jimmy.
Well,
teachers love acronyms.
I mean, let's get to we've covered a lot of the things that we've talked about. I mean, environmental justice, supporting unhoused students. You briefly touched on like student transportation, but I think the biggest piece is what it looks like to teach in the classroom, right? And because that's what schools are meant for, is a place to educate our kids, right? And so I wonder if y'all could talk a little bit about, what does, strong culturally relevant curriculum look like? What does high quality equitable teaching look like? What does authentic shared decision-making really look like for the classroom?
You want to go first, Hilaria?
Sure. Something that I can talk about is, since I'm also on the bilingual ed committee, something specifically, an issue that's specific to dual language schools is that we don't have a lot of options when it comes to curriculum, and a lot of times in dual language schools specifically, we're creating a lot of curriculum, and that's a lot of time and a lot of time outside of contract hours, and a lot of translating, and a lot of sometimes paying for materials out of our own pockets in order to give like a full rounded curriculum that meets the needs of our students. And so just bringing it back to bargaining again too, in our proposal for bilingual educators, we're asking for differentiated stipends for bilingual ed teachers who teach in a different language, for sheltered English teachers who teach English at a dual language school, because of all the additional time it takes to kind of beef up our curriculum and make it engaging for our students.
Yeah, I would add that some of the things we're really looking for is, you know, we have some good board policies around like ethnic studies, and however, we would like it implemented with more fidelity across the grade levels. As someone who teaches newcomer students, I see that my students are coming, especially from Central American, Middle Eastern countries, where they're not aware of like the racial paradigm in the United States. And I think that that's really important their first year to educate them about. So we really need more ethnic studies across the board. I think that will reduce conflicts and develop more empathy and understanding for our students. It's going to help them to be more college and career ready and to be able to work you know, across cultures in our society and be citizens of Oakland, which is such a diverse place. I think in addition, we also know that there's lots of right-wing attacks going around in if you're talking about LGBTQ issues, if you're talking about teaching about gender studies in the classroom, if you're teaching about racial justice in the classroom and ethnic studies. And what we're hoping is that we know that we have some academic freedom in our contract in Oakland that's very special and important and sacred, and that our district currently supports us. But we also would like it to get it in writing in our contract that the district will be proactive. If all of a sudden a teacher who's teaching ethnic studies in OUSD is being singled out on Fox News, we want something in writing that the district's going to have our backs. We know our union's going to have our backs, but we want to make sure that, you know, if Fox News decides to beat up on an Oakland teacher, that the district's going to come out in full force and support us the same way the union will, which I think is important for us to be able to continue to educate our students with Oakland values.
Yes, and the school district should have its teachers' backs. And I'm curious then now, I know that there is a big super rally that's happening on Wednesday. Could you give a little bit about the details of that? I know it's by Lake Merritt. It's going to be for the afternoon. And we're definitely going to come out and support. So what does it mean? What does it mean for parents and students and everything, right? Because it's the minimum day, Wednesday. So what does that look like for folks, and how they can show up, where they can show up?
Yeah, so that's going to be Wednesday from 2 to 6 at the Lake Merritt Amphitheater. And for educators, it's a PD boycott. And so PD is our professional development that we usually have on Wednesdays. And so we're taking an action to boycott PD that day. And we're hoping for families and students to come. There's going to be different organizations tabling, I believe. There's going to be some art builds, lots of art, music. Anything else, Jimmy?
Yeah, I would also like want to this is a very important event for what's going on with our contract right now. We've written 21 proposals that we spend lots of time researching and writing together as a 50-member team, and we've presented them to the district. The district barely asks any questions. They cancel sessions. They've barely proposed anything. They keep delaying. We've been out of a contract since Halloween, or November 1st, actually. And we've been working very hard. The district is not responding, and we don't want to have to escalate labor actions. But if we're given no choice, then we're given no choice. So if we can have a big showing here, perhaps that could be something that could signal to the district that they need to take bargaining seriously and be professional, show up to the table with proposals, and negotiate, compromise with us. Let's work this out between the union and the district so that we can avoid things that continue to distract from the job of teaching our students and supporting our students through these difficult times. But right now, educators are leaving. They can't afford to live in the Bay Area anymore, to continue teaching in Oakland. They want to stay. So many people want to stay, but they need to be given a reason to stay. And they need to see that the district is bargaining in good faith. So that's, I think, the bigger message that we need to send to the district right now is please bargain with the teachers so we can avoid some of those other
so folks
things.
show up on Wednesday at the amphitheater. What time did you say it started? At 1? At 2 o'clock. So come out, support. 2 o'clock, you know, it is this crazy daylight savings time, so it should be brighter at the end of the day. And we're hoping that there's no rain. So come out, support, show that you're here for public school teachers, that you support public schools, that you support the movement that is not just about teachers and educators, but is about what the ways that we can like build our community together around our public schools. So appreciate you both. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Hilaria, for joining us today. I'm so glad I got to meet you. I hope I can see you that day and we get to say hi in person. And appreciate. I know, Jimmy, how was it? This was your first IG Live ever. I feel honored you did it with us.
I know. It was fun. I thought it was going to be harder than it was.
Appreciate you both. Thank you so much. And taking time out from your work day and your lunch hour to come and join us to do this. So thank you so much for your work and your passion for Oakland students.